Good morning, students. Welcome back to lecture 7. Today I will be talking about a little bit more on model organisms and what are the model genomes that were sequenced. For example, we will cover mainly today Human Genome Project, and the subsidiary we want to see a little bit more on E. coli genome organization, yeast genome organization. What are the different components of the genomes, and why we need to study these small organisms? Why don't we quickly jump to humans? Why do we waste money and time and resources on studying these small organisms? You may pose a question. We will see some of these aspects and how each one of them can assist to better understand the other one. So I divided the topic into a specific outline. We briefly talk in one or two slides on model organisms, and then we will go into sequencing genome projects, whole genome projects, and taking few examples of these three, which are given as a part of the curricular in the syllabus unit 2. Coming on to model organisms, just think of a situation. You have a X number of humans. You have specific condition of either metabolic physiologic diabetes. You have a condition of cancer disease happening. There is a high mortality is happening in that. As a scientist, you wanted to study these two processes, diabetes and cancer, in humans specifically. So whatever that gives you at your hand is that you have a sample data from the patients, from the hospitals that you can take, you can start working on, and you have a genome sequence of the humans that you can look into, understand in terms of the wet and dry labs. Wet lab is looking at the patient sample, dry lab is looking into a condition with that normal human, diseased human. You go into computational methods. But it doesn't enough. It is not enough to understand a biological process. It takes a lot of effort to understand a simple concept in biology, and a lot of technical uh, commonalities you have to follow, controls you have to follow. For example, let's say I just want to start a cancer project today. I'm taking a disease sample in breast cancer. Now I'm randomly going to asking people, okay, I'm just want to test something, a drug on you, come, and then I want 100 samples. Do you think you will get the 100 people to approve that in just one day? And do you think it is ethical to use some humans for your own experimental control? You cannot. It's highly unethical, and it is not acceptable as a society. We work together. So what the what the scientists, what came across in that? Yes, there is ethical constraints, but you can make it simple. Try to go into lower organisms, because we want to benefit the whole society, benefit the humanity. So some species may suffer, but under ethical constraints, again, scientists have developed few model organisms such as yeast, worm, nematode. For example, you can see here nematode, fruit fly, yeast, zebrafish, mice, and frog, and then Arabidopsis, the plant species. So they have developed a model organisms where you can ask a specific fundamental biological question that has an applied research in humans. You test in these lower organisms, again following few ethical constraints in mice, but there are no ethical constraints for some of these lower organisms, for example, nematode and fruit fly. You use them as an experimental system, you study them for human biology and disease and health. And also, in clinical trials, yes, you get a consent from individuals who agree that I want to be tested on this drug. You can pursue that, but again, human clinical trials are quite expensive. They are quite expensive, cumbersome. If their experiment go positive or negative, you don't know. But coming on to these lower organisms, model organisms, they are very cheap to grow in the laboratory. You can take a nematode, you can have a 15 to 20 degrees incubator, you grow on millions and millions of worms in that. You feed them by agar plates, if we give them food in agar and bacteria. Same wise flies. And also life cycle of humans is different. For example, over 100 years, you may go through a sample from pedigree, grandparent, parent, and the next generation. You may have only 2 generations to study over 100 years. But these are model organisms have short life cycle. For example, the worm, it goes through a life cycle from adult to egg, and egg to adult in 3 days. The flies, it will take 2 weeks, and then lifespan is for 2 weeks here, and then this may have 2 months, 3 months lifespan. So you can study a lot of concepts in biology. Accordingly, people are developing and studying a lot of model organism research, and there is a databases for it. Each organism has a database where researchers can go and understand better. And to appreciate that, most of the biological questions answered through model organisms here have been contributed significantly to biology, and a lot of Nobel Prizes have been won in these areas. For example, C. elegans, for over 10 years, it has 3 Nobel Prizes for different biological concepts. Coming on to the curriculum, they are talking about three genome sequencing projects, or 3 genomes. One is E. coli, that's bacteria that we study, and one is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and another one is humans. So this chart represents a summary how what is the genome size in terms of numbers: 4 million, 12 million, 3.2 billion. How many genes are supposed to be coded by the genome? In terms of phylogeny or phyla, E. coli prokaryote, eukaryotes, prokaryote bacteria, Cerevisiae eukaryote fungi, humans Homo sapiens, which are the institute or company pursued the sequencing projects when it was completed. E. coli was University of Wisconsin-Madison Genetic Center. Saccharomyces cerevisiae was international collaboration for the yeast genome sequencing. And humans, there are 2 simultaneous, in parallel, 2 companies went. One is a government organization, International Human Genome Sequencing Consortium, and another one is called Celera Genomics. It's a private company. Both went in parallel. And completion of this 1997, 1996, humans first draft in 2001, completed draft in 2003. Again, some annotations happened. A more refined draft was coming in 2006. But keep it as, for exam point of view, you can use this 2001, 2003. Let's take in each example at a time. Escherichia coli, E. coli. So just go into a sense of first understanding general concepts of the organism, advantages towards what are the genome concepts, what are the functional significances, overall appreciative of a single species. We will go ahead in the lecture. Escherichia coli is also known as E. coli. Is a gram-negative facultative anaerobic rod-shaped coliform bacteria, and it is commonly present in the lower intestine or the gut of humans, and it is humans and warm-blooded organisms, and it is non-pathogenic. There is some strains of E. coli. Some of the strains are non-pathogenic, some are pathogenic. But the reference strain that was used for E. coli was non-pathogenic strain. That's called K12. We'll see in the next slide. And it is already well known, right? Well known that who doesn't know E. coli? Who doesn't know E. coli starting from biology student? You know it from studying about cell wall composition, studying about how the operon has been established, and studying about DNA replication, replicon. You can know about many other, for example, mutations were discovered, evolutionary studies were done, gene transfer mechanism, for example, transformation, F plasmid. And also you can use these organisms to genetically modify some of these genes to, for example, humulin. It uses E. coli vectors to put it into insert human insulin gene, where you use expression studies. You go into a biotechnological application of producing humulin in large proportions. So it is also known as a model microbe or model organism, or typically workhorse of molecular biology, helping to understand molecular biology basics and cell physiology concepts. A lot of good contributions have been done. And also one important concept is called, it's part of the microbiota of the human population, human gut microbiota. And it is a good one. It is in the part of the good system. And it also interacts with some other pathogens in the gut. And it establishes a gut microflora that plays a critical role in disease. That also you need to remember. And when you constitute the genome, you can see in the next slides different components. The E. coli consists of the genome 55% protein coding, 25% nucleic. In terms of the building blocks of the E. coli, what are the constitutes cell wall components, whole organism level? It is made up of 55% protein, 25% nucleic acid, lipids, some cell wall components, and other metabolites in terms of physiology. In coming on to the genome, you know that the genome of the bacteria resides in 2 locations. One is plasmid, that is extra chromosomal. It will have its own origin, but mainly the most of the genome is located in a single chromosome called nucleide. It's a nucleide region present in the cell here. And then one of the striking features of the genome called insertion sequences. There are specific hopping sequences called insertion sequences are there, and also it's highly transportable within the cytoplasm. The reference strain used is called K12 strain, and then complete genome of this much base pairs. And then if you look into the genome, protein coding regions are 87.8% of the genome. For example, the genes are protein specific to E. coli, and other are RNAs, some are non-coding repeats. Amount 11% encodes regulatory and other function proteins. So when you have been asked to write about genome organization about E. coli, better you constitute writing the notes in terms of having the structure and having the composition of the genome, the base pairs, what are the reference strains, and then go into percentage composition. That's good enough for 2 marks or 4 mark questions. Again, you can go into further explaining the circular genomic region, starting from the 0 point of the nucleotides, going to where origin C, the replicative origin present, and then other clusters of metabolic genes, tryptophan, GAL, you can mention about that. And you can write some points here that can also fetch 30% or open reading frames. And also the genome is very condensed. Compared to human histones, bacterial genome is also very condensed, supercoiled and bound by H-like proteins, and they are separated by specific region, protect, condense, or organization of the DNA. How many are polycistronic, how many are monocistronic, you can write that also. It is a single haploid cell, the haploid genome. So coming on to advantages, what are the advantages of the sequencing E. coli genome or any other genome per se? The first thing is that you would like to know more about the organism, how it works in terms of life cycle, growth, physiology, metabolism, per se E. coli here. And you want to contribute to the, in terms of the fundamental genetic code, which what are the genes coded, what are the function of the each gene. You want to know complete set of it. You know, going into a omics study here. And also one more, the best is that by sequencing this strain, you can compare the genome with other non-pathogenic strain which causes diseases in humans, and see that what are the functional variations from pathogen, non-pathogenic, excuse me, it's pathogenic strains here. You have to remove the non here. This is non-pathogenic. You compare with pathogenic strain functional variation. It's okay. You can compare with some other non-pathogenic strains are also, you are looking for phylogenetic approaches. You can do that. By comparing that either to prokaryote, eukaryote, human, comparing to human also, you know, so some of the origin of the genes in homology studies and how the genes move between genomes. That's called horizontal gene transfer, vertical gene transfer. You just understand the basic terms good enough. For the class, you don't need to go into too much details right now. So these are the advantages of sequencing any genome, for example, E. coli genome in terms of bacterial comparative genomics. Coming on to fungi, coming on to yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, it is called baker's yeast or brewer's yeast. It's also called budding yeast. It's belonging to the fungi. It's a model eukaryote. Bacteria is prokaryote. It is a model eukaryote, mainly to study also again molecular cell biology, life cycle, and also it has a huge advantages compared to bacteria and the biochemical understandings of protein-protein interactions. We'll see in further slide, and also in terms of industrial biotechnology, fermentation, industrial microbiology, it's one of the key player in that. You go through into specific other elaborative concepts. In terms of protein, include cell cycle proteins because they go to a budding process. Each cell divides into two, one but new cell buds off at that. And also it talks about signaling proteins and also enzymes that have been well studied. And for example, one more important, homologous recombination during meiosis, cell cycle that happens, that's been well studied in the yeast. Furthermore, you can do gene knockout strains are also. And importantly, it's economically for industry also. Coming on to yeast genome project, yeast genome sequencing, it was completed in 1996. And these many base pairs were being coded for the genome. And the genome has been divided into 16 chromosomes, ranging from sizes 230K base pairs to 2.3K base pairs. And the genome consists of 6,000 operating frames, specifically saying that approximately 6,000 genes are there that are protein coding genes. But during annotation, it may be now approximately 6,400 that was estimated. And compact genome organization. And then one more thing is that retrotransposons, transposons. Insertion sequences were found in bacteria, But coming on to yeast, there are another specific molecule called transposons have been found in the genome. And the reference strain that is used for say Cerevisiae sequencing is called S288C. If given a 2-mark, 4-mark question, if you include the reference strain name, that gives more credit to your answer. And each genome, each group of scientists who studying, for example, C. elegans, bacteria, or yeast, they have their own inclination to how do you say chromosomes, how do you say the gene names. For example, humans, we say chromosome 1 to 22, X chromosome 23. C. elegans, you say chromosome 10, 20, like that. But each, they have a peculiar nomenclature. They use a specific gene names in this code sequence. For example, they divided the 16 chromosomes into alphabets A to P. A is A alphabet capital A represents first chromosome, P represents 16th chromosome, and they use a specific designation for each of the gene. For example, this gene name here, Y is specific to the yeast, and G is the chromosome G in the number, either left or right in presence of the chromosome from centromere. And this is the sequence number from the genome sequencing project. And either Watson or Crick Strand, it is following one of the designation. You can see another example here. This is one of the example of each chromosome 2, and they have been annotated sequence and it's been represented in the genome database. And you see the blue region represents sequenced, and then the dark blue, the light blue is sequences of the same cosmid. We'll see what is the cosmid. We have seen bacterial bags, right? Human chromosome in the last class, bags are used for human cloning, but cosmids can also be used. We'll see what are these. And then they understood that in sometimes they could see a gaps between the contigs. We spoke in the last slide what is contig. So the gaps are there in the contigs. The annotation or the computational tools will not help in that, because it basically the system tells there is a gap. I don't know what's in there. I cannot tell you anything more. So how do you sequence the gaps? You again use traditional PCR sequencing method. You design a primers here by knowing these contig locations, then extend the primers so that you know the unknown sequence at the gap here. Again, you put the gap sequence into the system, ask it to annotate properly this chromosome 2 in this location. I sequenced it, I'm confirming it, I'm allowing it to annotate. Don't make it as a gap, fill the gap in this sequence. Again, the composition of the yeast genome, there are almost 40% are unknown proteins that again in the year 2000, by now I think there might have been more information has been changed. You write an answer, you explain that it's been as per 2000 year. This is the percentage of distribution of different components. And you look in the budding yeast cell, this is the bud coming out, they have a cell wall, it's a eukaryote. The genome is in the nuclear location in the nucleus specifically. There are compartments in cytoplasm, there are vacuoles, there may be some plasmids, some other extra chromosomal information might also be there here, but mainly in the nucleus. So what is the cosmid? We are speaking about cosmid in the previous slides. This summarizes a general understanding of different types of cloning vector used so far in the genome sequencing platform or in molecular biology. Someone please mute your microphone. Thank you. So the typically is plasmids, bacterial plasmid you have used, insert size in kilobases, 0.5 to 8 kilobases. Bacteriophage lambda, this bacterial artificial, it's a lambda phage specifically, 9 to 25 kilobases. The cosmid, another vector, it's a mix of plasmid and phage together, and it can include 30 to 45 kilobases. And one more thing, we studied bacterial artificial chromosomes. They go up to 300 kilobases. And one thing that yeast can also be used as a vector, that's yeast artificial chromosome. They are highly efficient in putting largest fragments of the genes inserts, is 100 kilobases, 1,000 kilobases, 1,000 into 3 zeros. So 1 lakh bases you can put it into the vector. So this is the fundamental understanding again. It's a good to remember that, and very beneficial. So coming on to one more advantages of the yeast, one more biochemical technique we use in the yeast system is called yeast-2 hybrid system. So what is this system? I might take a brief few minutes. But again, we will talk techniques in the next unit where it talks more about technicality and methods. We might explain the East to hybrid in more broader way so that you can write it in a good, full-fledged manner. It's just like we studied protein-protein interactions, right, in the proteomic class. So two proteins can interact. Given an in vivo condition, humans, our proteins interact. But at the same time, we have close to 20 to 30,000 proteins. So we don't know which physiological condition, how they behave. Sometimes to isolate the protein in its native form is tough. So you make artificial vectors, artificial proteins you can make out of it. And rather than studying in humans, either in vitro analysis or in vivo analysis, you can use a yeast system because the artificial chromosome in yeast or some other advantages of the cloning in yeast will allow to clone your specific inserts into the system, make specific kind of constructs that will code for a specific protein of humans or artificial. For example, I can code for even Drosophila also, even C. elegans also I can test in yeast to hybrid, not only humans. The system works on DNA transcriptional activation. You know that in the molecular biology basics, a gene will be in a system of on and off. A transcription factor specifically binds to a DNA binding domain of transcription factor, goes and binds to a specific gene in the promoter region, and it associates with some other protein X coactivator. Together, this complex can activate a gene to go into on situation, or if no proper, it may go into off situation. So what is this X that is necessary? This conformation, what is the other protein that is associated with this to make the system on? You can use yeast to hybrid system, make a construct that is called bait, where you want to study whether bait that interacts with other called prey, or it's another protein Y and X. X is a bait. You make a construct with the bait, you make a construct, specific protein will be coded, but it cannot activate the transcription because it needs another protein that's maybe prey. And prey is here. When both are constructed in yeast, both are put it into a yeast system, studying the in vivo function of gene expression within the yeast. When these two proteins come together through their association, because the construct will express specific conformation of the proteins, the fusion protein will come up of these A and B or X and Y. This association will make the system to on, that may be used as a LAC-C, and a blue color coding will come up. So it's a brief overview. We will talk more about it again. That will help in understanding protein-protein interaction in these two hybrid assays. And major application is that it is used to determine whether two known proteins interact with each other or not. First thing is physical interaction. Next, if they are used to identify unknown proteins, also cDNA library proteins of interest. The first thing is just interact and how the functions. Okay. Give me 1 second. I will mute someone. Okay. So that is about bacteria and yeast. So 10 to 12 minutes we will cover now to Human Genome Project, human genome sequencing. Please go back to previous lecture also, where we talk a little bit more introduction to Human Genome Project. We spoke a little bit more on technology also, but I will recap again. But if I miss some of the details, go to the previous lecture. Human Genome Project is nothing but cracking down the life's code. So a typical outflow of any sequencing method, either yeast or bacteria or humans or C. elegans, you have a specific methodology. But bacterial genome sequencing, they might have used a more traditional approach because of the few million bases of the sequences. But coming on to billions, some other extra numbers, the huge genomes, you need a complex method and computational approaches. Take an organism, either yeast or human or C. elegans, isolate the genomic DNA, then digest the genomic DNA with restriction enzymes. You make a map, genomic map. Then once the genome maps are there, you take a specific clone of it, and then you go with a shotgun sequencing method. But the terminology is just like you are shooting with a shotgun some of the genome sequences. It goes into random pieces. You don't know which piece you are aiming for. You just blindly shoot with a shotgun the DNA. You get specific sequences and you clone them again into subcloning, specific context. Then you resequence again, compare with this, resequence that, align them. If the gaps are there, you go with the traditional PCR, annotate and identify. This is the typical outflow of any sequencing platform, any sequencing methodology. And again, we spoke about different steps in sequencing in any of these human genome per se. Starting from genome, 12 steps we spoke. Again, this is an overview again. You can either make it into this way. You can write the essay given. You can given the essay given this way, you can write different steps, or you can go into different subheadings, making into specific strain you are choosing, specific strategy, chemistry, assembly, and closure, data release, annotation, and publication. If you want to write an essay on it, you make on your own notes. The following slides will help you to make the notes. Remember that these following notes have been depicted from this article published in Nature, where 2001 first genome draft was released. Some scientists wrote a script on that, a small draft of the sequence, very nicely explained. So I will quickly go into important points in the text. On your free time, you can read it more through and understand in better way. I will just cover the gist given the time. And so from inception, what was the idea of Human Genome Project? Why they want to conceive an idea of defying God's code? And one of the key two principles was, first thing was, they just want to show and prove that collaborative efforts established among humans and scientists, we can work through welcomed collaborators and move beyond borders, not only one country, so that we can put an example to the scientific community that a collaborative effort, much of the difficult tasks in science can be achieved. That is one of, in that sense only, a lot of consortiums have been established. One of the consortium here is that International Human Genome Sequencing Consortium. Second, the project is required all the human genome sequence information to be freely and publicly available within 24 hours of its assembly. They're not saying collaborators, and again, they are not saying that the information is only restricted to one of the consortia. They want to make it public. I just want to give the code to everyone, not only keep to myself. I am not selfish. Even many of the scientists are not selfish. They are working with a motto to help in a cause of the plight of the human diseases, understand a concept. So they made a rule that within 24 hours of any assembly of a backclone, contig, or any chromosome, you are sure that you assembled it in a well way, you put it into the public databases. That's it. Anyone who is not part of the consortium, anyone can access this information, get in touch with us if you want to know more about it. That's two of the key principles they conceived this idea. That is principles. Again, what are the goals? First goal is, again, they have two early goals. One goal, building genetic and physical maps of human and mouse genomes. Already there may be traditional, some establishments are there. Using those landmarks, they want to redefine and they want to go into the more depth of the human genome. You want to have more into genetic and physical maps of the human genome in terms of chromosomes. Again, mouse also. And in some time, again, in parallel, so they want to keep in mind that when they sequence the genome, it's ATGCs only. Annotations, the computer, whatever tells, it goes through. But whether it annotated it properly or not, how do you test it in living organism? You cannot test in humans as such. So in parallel, they wanted to sequence model organism genomes also. For example, yeast or worm genomes, they also sequenced in parallel, so that you, whatever the human genome things you are comparing, you can use the basic ATGCs in the yeast and worm, see that whether annotations are happening in proper way. Okay, and you can test some of these genes again in the worm in terms of functionality. You see that this annotated sequence is good enough to go in the functional level. So many phases have been done. From 1990 it incepted, and you go into that sequences, whatever happened in million bases, starting from January, October. They pitched in into October 2000, 2001, first draft was released. Finished sequences, they multiple annotations done. They confirmed that these are the finished sequences. But in the first draft, majority of that undrafted sequence, they had to go through annotation. How the approach they have done? Inception, goals, and approaches. How they approached it? They approached in two phase terms. Phase one is called shotgun phase. Phase two is called finishing phase. Finishing the annotation of filling the gaps. The shotgun, we again spoken. You cut that. You first put it into the library, genomic or cDNA library. then cut the libraries, then again go into context, raw data sequences, assign them a genetic physical map, refine them, and any gaps, second phase, you fill the gaps with the traditional sequence. And the shotgun phase specifically looks on these three principles: obtaining a DNA clone to sequence, sequencing the DNA clone, first obtaining, how do you make the DNA clones? For example, genomic and then cDNA clones. These clones can be put into either cosmids, it can be put into AGS, put it into bags, you can make that libraries, then sequence each clone and then assemble the sequence data, overlap with the contiguous context and align them. Again, I have seen multiple questions on shotgun sequencing, either in 2, 4, and sometimes 15 marks. So you go look into the text again. Shotgun sequencing involves randomly breaking up DNA sequences into lots of small pieces and then reassembling the sequence, looking for regions of overlaps and filling the gaps out. Because why the shotgun sequence? Because human genomes is huge. You cannot go into one stretch. You break into small fragments, you go into shortcuts. Again, the method, you use it in the whole genome shotgun Sanger methoding, and then assembly, how it is done. Then there is hierarchical shotgun method, because you have a large clones to chromosomes. Specifically, you are looking only chromosome 1 at a time, chromosome 2 at a time. You go on them and then make the backs into that, cross check into that. You go with a hierarchy. You don't go blind, you go with the hierarchy here. Again, traditional DNA molecular biology tools, you use PCR to amplify if you want to check. For example, screening for sequenced tagged sites. We will see what are those more in next class. Again, in situ hybridization you can use with the DNA fingerprinting, and one more data you can use that. We will explain in the methodology again. You can briefly write these notes also. Again, once the shotgun is done, you go back into verifying individual back clones, subclone them again. If you want specifically insert specific sequences with the primers, cross check again, and then it's again terminology used for shotgun here. Again, one more method that very beautifully explained by in this paper, how it's done. One more 2-mark question I have seen, that clone counting methodology. Explain clone counting methodology. It's nothing but you give a summary of this in 2 marks and 4-mark questions. You have clones, fingerprint clone context already in the maybe 4th or 5th stage of the genome sequencing steps, and then pick the clones for sequencing. Again, you go in the sequencing the clone context scaffold. You go with specific hierarchy in organization, and then take into a clone A, clone B, overlap, merge data, and then check with the mRNA location in the annotations and make a sequence context scaffold. Context, scaffold, and sequenced clones, again you use the terminology. You can make some steps into this. So how this, in terms of the 96 well plate, right, automated machine, you go with a specific clone here, you see that E7 and EF6 will have a contig, that is adjacent contigs, because they may not be placed in the well as adjacently as from the genome, they're random pieces. But you pick 3 clones from these 3 wells, then you came to know that they are adjacent contigs. You annotate computationally, you align, again go with the assertion. So in terms of not only that, this consortium, Celera Genomics by Craig Venter also parallelly going independent of this. He ventured a capital company and he worked on that. I also sequence independently this. He went into specific methodology here. This is whole genome assembly. See whatever that CSA is, that Celera sequencing assembly. You can go through the notes here. What the best is that he didn't go shotgun. He go into an approach called shredded. And along with that shredded, he computationally used, rather than go into context using the STS data, he jumped into a scaffold mainly. He jumped to scaffold with the computations and then come back into understand this and computationally to reduce the time. You can see that at the end, both the consortium and Celera came together. They published independently this data so that people can understand it. One more few slides, it talks about what the information advantages of human genome sequencing into molecular medicine. You go through this, read on the proteomics, whatever we discussed in previous classes, summary of this whole project. Also ethical implications, there were rules. It's a fairness, you cannot misuse the data, you need to use an informed consent. and the data should be used publicly for any genomic research without any hurdles, and you look into that. And that brings to the summary of the class today. More into this book, you can look into the ethical concerns. So that brings to the end of the class. The next class we will take ESTs, STs,